she just wanted to kill people. It really is as simple as that. I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
We were frantically making contact to say, you have a murderer and a murderer's accomplice in this vehicle, in your policing area right now, and you need to arrest them.
In my 32 years' experience of policing the streets of West Mercia, I have never experienced anything like this.
The girl that killed those people is not my daughter. My daughter's that nice 14-year-old that never came home.
I remember distinctly feeling, oh my God, when is this going to stop?
Hereford's a typical rural market town. Very low levels of crime and disorder, very safe place, great for tourism, which made this particular incident so unusual and really stood out.
On the 2nd of April 2013, the city of Hereford witnessed 2 crimes so brutal and so horrific that they would thrust an otherwise sleepy community into the news headlines.
There are reports of a series of brutal attacks in the Hunderton area of Hereford, which began this afternoon. Several people are believed to have been attacked.
In separate random assaults, 2 men are savagely set upon whilst innocently walking their dogs.
Your instinct is one of disbelief, really. A stabbing on the street is bad. 2 stabbings, frenzied attacks, and as brutal as they were really, really significant. And of course, it is incredibly unusual for a woman to conduct attacks like that.
The woman in question was Joanne Dennehy. But what police didn't know at the time was that the stabbings she'd committed on the streets of Hereford were the final crimes in a 14-day killing spree that started over 140 miles away in Cambridgeshire. Peterborough, 75 miles north of the capital. It has a population of 190,000 people, and in 2013, it was the home of letting agent Kevin Lee.
Kevin had a business called Quick Let, and that business was letting rooms out to homeless and vulnerable people.
Many of Quick Let's properties were in the Orton Goldhay area of Peterborough. 3 miles from the centre of town, it's a densely populated estate with lots of former council properties now owned by private landlords.
There wasn't a lot of vetting done, to be quite honest. Some used to be let out of prison, some people used to get kicked out of home. They'd go to the council and the council would recommend go to Quick Let. So it was that type of person that he used to let rooms to.
And this is how Kevin Lee would first meet Joanne Dennehy. 30-year-old Dennehy had just been released from prison, where she'd served a 14-week sentence for theft. But that wasn't the story she told unsuspecting businessman Kevin Lee.
She said that she'd come out of prison. She'd been in prison for 8 years because she'd murdered her father, because her father had raped her, which was a complete fabrication, and that she'd also burnt 2 people in a house fire and ran 2 people over in a car. So she'd killed a lot of people.
Joanne Dennehy would later be recognised as a pathological liar with psychopathic tendencies. But at the time, Kevin Lee had no reason to doubt what he was being told.
I just think because of his upbringing, like he was adopted, he just wanted to give people a chance in life. He said, oh, I just really want to help her.
He may have seen an opportunity to help a person in need, but Lee also realised that along with her friend, 7'3" Gary Stretch, Dennehy could be the perfect person to help him when it came to handling troublesome tenants. Police would later discover that Kevin Lee was deeply attracted to Dennehy. In order to win her affections, he would allow her to live in one of his houses, rent-free, and would often buy her gifts. On one occasion, he even gave her the money to buy a car.
She was given a free room to stay in and kept her housing benefit, and then just went along to the houses like a thug, just threatening people to move out. And I think Kev needed that kind of help because he was that desperate to get rid of people.
On the 29th of March 2013, Lee had arranged to meet with Dennehy at one of his Peterborough properties. And when he failed to come home that night, his wife Christina instinctively knew something was wrong.
I thought, something's not right. You know, it's not like Kevin not to return. And I called him, but his phone was off. So I was already a little bit suspicious, really. That night was just absolutely awful.
Unable to find Kevin, Christina reported her husband's disappearance to the police.
I was the senior investigating officer on call for major crime over the Easter weekend in 2013. I went to, as most forces do, a morning meeting to look at the threat, harm and risk ongoing incidents across the force. And an officer in Peterborough raised the issue of a missing from home called Kevin Lee. All of my instincts were saying, this is a bad news story and it's going to unfold as a bad news story.
Those concerns were confirmed later that day, when police discovered the remains of Kevin's burnt-out car on a farm track in nearby Yaxley.
When the police had told me they'd found a burnt-out car, I knew something sinister had happened. And then the next day, the detectives turned up to say that they'd found a body. And I knew it was Kevin.
Kevin Lee's body had been discovered in a ditch by the A16 in Newborough by a man walking his dog. He was wearing ladies' clothing and appeared to have been deliberately left in a humiliating position.
It didn't look natural to me. It looked very manipulated. And what I saw was a man's body laying on the edge of a drainage ditch in a farmer's field, wearing a black sequin dress that had been pulled up above the waist.
The dress that Kevin was wearing had numerous holes in it that were quickly identified as having been made by a knife. He'd been stabbed 5 times in the chest, with the wounds penetrating both lungs and his heart.
From that point, it was clear to me that we were now dealing with a murder investigation and something way more than misadventure or an accident.
The ditch Kevin Lee's body was found in was in a remote area of the Fens, a factor that would make the investigation that would follow much harder for the attending detectives.
I was standing in the middle of a field with no witnesses, no CCTV, no likely prospect of automatic number plate recognition or a mechanism to identify which vehicles had been in the vicinity. All of the traditional investigative methods were going to be stripped away from the early investigation very, very quickly. So I concluded fairly early on that the answer to this would probably lay in the association that people would have with Kevin in part and parcel of his daily life, or indeed a hidden segment of his life that perhaps his family were unaware of.
With very little evidence to go on, police examined Kevin Lee's phone records.
One of the real ironies of this investigation was that Christina Lee would become absolutely pivotal to identify who killed her husband. It was her frantic activity ringing telephone numbers that were in Kevin's phone from billing that would eventually allow the police to determine that at the time of Kevin's Mondeo being burned in Yaxley, Joanne Dennehy's mobile phone was in the same proximity or cell site. So the link between the burning car, Kevin being missing, and Joanne Dennehy being in proximity to the car when it was on fire put her as a suspect very early on into the investigation.
Police quickly went to 38 Byfield in Orton Goldhay, the property owned by Kevin Lee, where Joanne Dennehy had been living. Dennehy was nowhere to be seen, but what officers found was a chilling crime scene. A blood-stained mattress had been dumped in the back garden of the property. But forensic testing would show that the blood didn't match that of Kevin Lee. And to add to the detectives' concerns, Royal Navy veteran John Chapman, another of Quicklet's tenants, had also mysteriously vanished. On the 30th of March 2013, the body of property landlord Kevin Lee was found in a ditch near Newborough in Cambridgeshire. And having searched his phone records, police were desperate to speak to a former associate of his who had recently been released from prison. That person was 30-year-old Joanne Dennehy. Born and raised in the picturesque Hertfordshire town of Harpenden, Dennehy's childhood years were much like that of any ordinary young girl.
Like everybody else, she liked to go to the playground. She was just a happy girl. Very sensitive girl, though. She was very sensitive. Like, you know, if she stood on a worm or something, she would be really upset. So she was a loving girl. When she was at school, she always had a good report. I never had to go to the school because she had a problem. She was polite to everybody. The teachers always said that she was a nice girl.
But when Joanne Dennehy hit her teens, her parents would see a dramatic change in her personality. She started to play truant from school and often found herself in trouble with the police. Her family's concerns were further compounded when at the age of 14, she started a long-term relationship with a man 6 years older than her.
We were at the stage where we were begging her to please just finish school. You know, the boy we didn't like, there wasn't any doubt about it. We compromised and we said, look, bring him round for dinner. At weekends, same weekends. We just wanted her to finish and have some kind of education and a decent kind of life. But she didn't want to know. She really didn't want to, and neither did he. It just escalated from there.
Everybody says that a child has a bad period of time, you know, be unruly and whatever. So we just thought, well, that's it. She's going to leave home at 15, come back at 18, 20, and we thought as long as she comes home with healthy and okay, and that, you know, then life will just go back to what it was.
No, I always thought she'd come back. I did honestly think she would come back. Do you know, when people say that because she's not been in my life now for maybe 10, 15 years, people would say to you, oh, how many children have you got? And I'd say 2. We have Maria and we have Joanna. And Maria's obviously been in the army, done all this. And they say, well, what about Joanna? And I say, she's a free spirit. She's out there wandering around somewhere. Because that's what I thought, you know, she was doing her own thing, and when she finally grew up, she would come home. But she never did come back to us.
Estranged from her parents, Joanne Dennehy's life spiralled into one of crime. She served various short prison sentences for dishonesty, as well as carrying a blade in a public place. In 2012, she also received a community service order for assault, and in that same year found herself serving a 14-week sentence for theft. It was after being released from Peterborough Prison that she would first meet landlord Kevin Lee. Lee owned a number of properties in the area, and Dennehy and her friend Gary Stretch became his enforcers, helping him to put pressure on troublesome tenants to either pay up or move out. But the relationship between Kevin Lee and Joanne Dennehy became more than just a business one.
She was a very manipulative person that manipulated a lot of people. I think she did the same to Kevin, lured him in, and unfortunately that cost him his life.
On the afternoon of the 29th of March, Kevin went to Rolleston Garth with presents to give Joanne. There is no doubt that the meeting was geared around a sexual interaction between the two, and certainly the dress was a prop used in that sexual encounter. Kevin was stabbed several times in the chest, and it's clear to me that that took place as part and parcel of sexual activity, or certainly intimacy, in one of the rooms at Rolleston Garth.
By now, detectives were well aware of the connection between Kevin Lee and Joanne Dennehy. She was their prime suspect in his murder. So finding her and her accomplice Gary Stretch became their #1 priority.
Very quickly, a manhunt started over the weekend where, quite unusually, we went to seek the media's help, given a 7'3" giant of a man in the company of a striking woman who's got a tattoo of a star on her cheek. We're on the run. I really needed the public's help in telling me where they were because the risk to them was great. The significant line of inquiry that came out of the public appeal actually came from a police officer in Norfolk. He'd seen the appeal and he was also investigating a drive-off from a petrol forecourt where a girl had gone into the kiosk, stolen some biscuits and food from within and then driven off quickly. He gave me the registration number of the car and that was the absolute missing link in the investigation. The irony of that vehicle was that it was actually paid for by Kevin and it was a gift to Joanne, who subsequently would use that vehicle to deposit Kevin's body in the ditch at Newborough. But as soon as we had that registration number, we put it into the national computer for automatic number plate recognition, and we could see the car moving and activating on cameras as it was travelling down the M5 motorway towards the southwest.
During their journey, Dennehy and her accomplice Stretch were frequently caught on CCTV cameras. This footage from a motorway service station on the M5 was filmed just 72 hours after the discovery of Kevin Lee's body in the ditch at Newborough. But these wouldn't be the only images of Dennehy and Stretch that the police would discover during their investigation.
Whilst Joanne and Gary were on the run, they were committing crimes. I call it subsistence crime. They were literally stealing food to exist. And at one of the burglaries, they stole a camera. And they used that camera throughout their journey on the run from the police. And they were taking really bizarre photographs of them as if they were tourists. It was almost like they were on a trip to have as much fun as they could before the inevitable arrest happened.
On the run and low on cash, the pair now needed to sell some of the things they'd stolen. So they travelled to the Herefordshire town of Kington, where a friend of Gary Stretch's would put them in touch with former petty thief Mark Lloyd.
Up until that day, I'd never met Joanne Dennehy, never heard of her, never spoken to her. Me and Gary had a passing relationship because we shared the same jail system. And that's all the connection between me and Gary.
But Mark Lloyd's criminal connections were about to put him in a position that he never could have imagined.
Gone into the front room, the table's full of tablets, TVs and all that. That's when she's pulled a knife out and said, I've just killed 3 people and I want to kill some more.
Mark Lloyd found himself in a house with Gary and Joanne and straight away found himself in a position where he too felt that he probably had to comply with whatever request was made of him.
I honestly did fear for my own life then. I thought if I don't play these games, she's going to attack me. It was obvious straight away that Joanne had complete control over Gary Stretch. It was strange watching her control a man who could literally pick her up and snap her in half. He wasn't besotted, he was bewitched, under a spell. I don't care what people say, he was under a spell. She was in total control of the situation.
Joanne's controlling traits go back probably to her mid-teens, to the point that she leaves the family environment. We've spoken to a number of people who seem to be under the spell of Joanne for periods in their life, certainly men in sexual relationships with her. She was very, very capable of getting what she wanted from a situation, very crafted in manipulating people and men specifically.
Now Mark Lloyd was about to become the next man to fall under Dennehy's control. She needed to get to nearby Hereford to sell some of the items she'd stolen. And he was told in no uncertain terms that he would be going with her.
Drive from Kington to Hereford, it was, yeah, that was horrific. She was drinking whiskey, she was getting more aggressive, more excitable, basically. Kept showing me the knife, telling Gary to drive slowly, and then all of a sudden she'd pull over and say, well, I want a photograph. And she got me posing for photographs, made me drink half a bottle of whiskey, which I'm amazed I kept down. And we slowly made our way to Hereford.
The drive from Kington to Hereford took around 45 minutes. And when they arrived, Dennehy took Mark Lloyd into this shop to buy cigarettes.
She's right behind me. I mean, people think she's giving me a hug. She's not giving me a hug. She's, yeah, got not the blade on me, but she's got the handle on me. And she's saying to me, look, Mark, just get the cigarettes. And when the till was open, I honestly thought she was going to leap the counter and rob the money out the till. And thankfully, strange thing to say, I know, but thankfully she started flirting with her.
But Dennehy's playful mood was about to take a much darker turn. Now back in the car, holding the knife she'd used to kill Kevin Lee, she set about finding a random member of the public to attack.
Her and Gary having a discussion. She's going, I want my fun now, find me a victim, find me a victim. No women, no children. And I'm sat in the back thinking, the first person this person sees, she's going to do something. And within 30 seconds of leaving the shop, Gary's physically pointed through the window and said, will he do?
Mark Lloyd was about to witness something unthinkable on the streets of Hereford, something that would leave an innocent man fighting for his life. On the 30th of March 2013, the body of Peterborough property landlord Kevin Lee was found in a ditch in a remote area of the Cambridgeshire Fens. Detectives in charge of the case had identified 30-year-old Joanne Dennehy as someone they urgently wanted to speak to about the death. But Dennehy and her accomplice 7'3" Gary Stretch had fled the area and were known to be headed towards Herefordshire. Police were unaware of the exact destination, but suspected that Dennehy, wanted for questioning in relation to the murder, would go to ground. But they could never have predicted what would happen next. Joanne Dennehy and Gary Stretch left the town of Kington and drove the 45-minute journey to Hereford, where they were hoping to sell stolen goods to a contact of former petty thief Mark Lloyd. But with the knife she used to kill Kevin Lee in her possession, an alcohol-fueled Dennehy now had other plans.
Her and Gary having a discussion. You know, Gary, you've had your fun, find me a victim. Gary's physically pointed through the window and said, will he do?
The man that Gary Stretch had spotted was retired Hereford firefighter Robin Barretza.
Mr. Barretza was walking along a street in Hereford called Westphaling Street, actually walking towards his home address, taking his dog for a walk. An innocent man going about his daily business. And the actual attack took place on him not very far from his home address. He was attacked from behind. He said it felt like he was being punched in the back. He turned around, he was struck on the arm. He actually fought back. But of course the stabbing was so serious that he was very, very badly injured.
What made this assault even more shocking was that it happened in such a public place.
The location where Mr. Barretza was attacked, it's a very pleasant area. It's very peaceful. It's next to the main cemetery in town. This was shortly after 3 o'clock. There would have been lots of children about as well.
There's one particular piece of CCTV footage on the side of a health centre which shows Robin Barretza walking past, and then in close proximity the green Vauxhall Astra which Joanne and Gary were in. And of course the consequences of just a few moments later led to the terrible injuries to Robin Barretza.
In broad daylight, 63-year-old Robin Barretza was stabbed twice and left with potentially fatal injuries to his upper body.
I thought the man was dead, and she's calmly got back in the car, give Gary a kiss on the cheek, and then wanted to do some more.
And they then spent the next 4 or 5 minutes driving around looking for their next intended target. And it was Gary's proposal to Joanne, what about him, when they saw John Rogers.
John Rogers, a 56-year-old man, lived in Hereford, liked playing the guitar, was just a man who kept himself to himself largely. He was walking his dog and he was attacked from behind by Dennehy.
Joanne's just got out the car, very, very casually walked up to the bloke. Did something exactly the same as before because he wasn't startled or anything. He stopped. She probably mentioned the dog again, and then she's got in really, really close, and then I'm not joking, it was a blur. It was like a splash or a movie. And I honestly thought the first man was definitely dead, but I thought this man has just died in front of me.
At one point, he was face down on the ground and had received terrible stab wounds to his back and upper body. She turned him over and did the same to the front. And John has subsequently told us that he felt his life ebbing away from him as he watched blood from his own body trickle away down the street.
As Joe's walked back with the dog, which totally spanned my head, she's got back in the front seat. No mention of the bloke, no mention of the fact that she's just killed someone in front of me. Said to Gary, that was nice, I need to do some more. As I'm looking past through the windscreen, the poor victim is like crawling, like literally on his hands and knees, and then he goes round the corner.
56-year-old John Rogers was stabbed more than 30 times in the back, chest and abdomen during a sustained attack that punctured both of his lungs and left him fighting for his life. Despite his significant injuries, he managed to crawl almost 100 yards to this path, where he would be helped by a passing member of the public.
I've 32 years' experience of policing the streets of West Mercia, and I, in my former time as a detective, have been involved in a number of inquiries. These two attacks were the most brutal stabbing offences that I've ever been cited on or involved with in my service. And I have no doubt at all that it was due to the skill of paramedics and medical people that meant that those two gentlemen, their lives were saved.
The injured men were airlifted to hospital in a critical condition. But Dennehy hadn't finished her frenzied rampage. She was still at large and looking for more victims on the streets of Hereford.
By this time, I can hear sirens everywhere. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, they were everywhere. And I'm thinking, this ain't gonna be too long, this ain't gonna be too long, this ain't gonna be... And then I was thinking, if I'm hearing this and Joe and Gary are hearing this, she's gonna think, wow, sod you, Mark.
Just a few hundred metres from where John Rogers was attacked is a small row of shops. And it was here that armed police would end Joanne Dennehy's reign of terror.
The officers approached Joanne Dennehy in the car. She was still holding the weapon that she'd used to attack both men. She was later described by the officers as actually being very calm and very cooperative. She was arrested and brought back to the police station.
If she and Gary had not been arrested when they were, I'm absolutely clear that the carnage would have continued. There is no doubt in my mind that the casualty list would have grown until she was stopped.
With Dennehy now in police custody, her parents were informed of her whereabouts for the first time in almost 10 years.
Well, I got a phone call from my wife, Kate, and said, I've got to speak to you face to face, and it's serious. Met the wife, and the wife said that our daughter had done a serious crime and they're not looking for anybody other than our daughter. And we just looked at each other and were devastated, didn't know what to do.
You can't imagine that. There's no words to say it. I can't tell you how difficult it was because I feel like I just turned off. Do you know, it feels like bereavement. You bring up your baby from baby to 14, never a problem. Then all of a sudden, the rebellion starts, which we expected. Then she gets into more and more trouble, and then she decides that I'm not staying here, I'm going off with my new friend. And then someone's knocking at the door saying that she's a murderer.
Joanne Dennehy was detained at Hereford police station in connection with the murder of Kevin Lee in Cambridgeshire and the attempted murders of Robin Barretza and John Rogers. But even the most experienced officers were surprised by her behaviour.
Her attacks were incredibly vicious, and not very many minutes later, she's been arrested and she's in a police station being booked into the cell block and actually joking with staff. It's very, very concerning behaviour.
You are Joanne Christina Dennehy.
What you can't see from this footage is that I'm literally on the next desk being booked in. It just amazes me how unemotional the woman was. She didn't act like a person who'd just been arrested for 2 attempted murders and a murder. She looked like she just, I don't know, day out for her. Jumping around, happy, flirting with the officers.
You're very distinctive, I know.
I know, so you keep saying. So
It's clear to me that she's enjoying the spectacle, that people are looking at her as somebody that's about to become notorious.
Attempted murder and murder. Could be worse. A big fat black rabbit.
You could be what?
Big fat black rabbit.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not sure that would be worse though.
Yeah, worse. Yeah.
The way that she portrayed herself as smiley and interacting on a humorous level with the officers says to me, morally, she has no regard for what she's just done. She has no regard for the devastation left behind, and she loved being the centre of attention.
Why isn't it pen and paper? Because this makes my signature look really dodgy.
I think Joanne is a person who enjoys the catastrophe that she leaves behind. I think she has become more and more involved in killing because she's done it for the first time. She apparently got away with it for the first time, and she enjoyed the experience. And somebody who's prepared to accelerate their behaviour because they enjoy something as gory as killing is a very dangerous individual indeed.
When I saw the CCTV footage of Jo, it was like somebody I didn't know. She's standing there being charged, smiling and laughing with police officers. That's not the kind, loving Joanna that was our baby.
On the 2nd of April 2013, West Mercia police arrested violent criminal Joanne Dennehy for the brutal attempted murders of 2 unsuspecting members of the public, who'd been viciously stabbed on the streets of Hereford while walking their dogs. Prior to her capture, Dennehy was already wanted for questioning by officers from the Major Crimes Unit in relation to the death of Peterborough property landlord Kevin Lee, whose body had been found dumped in a ditch 3 days earlier. An unrepentant Dennehy and her accomplice Gary Stretch were now safely locked away. But for the officer in charge of the investigation, the true extent of her crimes was only now about to be revealed.
The day after Joanne had been arrested, I was in the major incident room with my investigating team, and the phone rang, and it was the control room. And the control room operator said to me, a body has been found in Thorney Dyke, just northeast of Peterborough. And I fully expected that to be the body of John Chapman. He'd been missing from the house that Joanne lived at, and couldn't account for his whereabouts at all, and there were some real concerns around his welfare. Almost immediately the phone rang again, and when I spoke to the operator in the control room, the conversation went along the lines of, "Are you aware of the body in the ditch at Thorney Dyke?" And I said, "Yes, I'd just taken a call." And the operator said, "There's 2 bodies in the ditch." I remember distinctly feeling, oh my God, when is this going to stop? And there was a genuine palpable sense of shock that went through the incident room. If that was John Chapman, who's the second person? And in which case, how many more?
The first body the police identified in the ditch at Thorney Dyke was that of John Chapman, the man police had been looking for since he disappeared from the Orton Goldhay house he'd shared with Joanne Dennehy 5 days earlier.
John Chapman was a really simple man with a simple lifestyle. Everybody talked about him with fondness. He was a drinker, he was a street drinker, he did nobody any harm. It's clear from the investigation that John Chapman was well acquainted with Joanne, and I suspect there may well have been a confrontation in that property that led to him being murdered in that house, in the very same house that Kevin Lee owned. He was killed in his bedroom, probably whilst he was incapacitated through his addiction to alcohol. He had a number of closely confined stab wounds in his chest, and subsequently the mattress that he was killed on was removed from his bedroom and dumped in the garden, no secret of the fact that it was heavily blood-stained.
The second body retrieved from the ditch at Thorney Dyke belonged to 31-year-old Lukas Slabozewski.
Lukas Slabozewski was a Polish national living in Peterborough, had family around the UK, lived a relatively chaotic lifestyle, more than sufficient evidence to say that he was a regular drug user, would be in the city where perhaps people homeless living in shelters or reliant on soup kitchens would congregate. And I think that's probably where the association with Dennehy was established.
This CCTV footage, filmed on the 19th of March 2013, shows Lucas's final movements on the day he went missing. Shortly after withdrawing money from this cash point, he would visit Joanne Dennehy at one of Kevin Lee's properties on Rolleston Garth in Peterborough.
Clearly there was an arranged meeting between he and Joanne. And I'm in no doubt that that was driven by sex, an agreement to meet for sex. What we know is that Lucas was attacked in that property and he was stabbed in the chest. At least one of those stab wounds piercing his heart. And he died in the house at Rolleston Garth, having pre-arranged meeting with Joanne there.
Police believed that Lucas was in fact Dennehy's first victim, having been killed 10 days before John Chapman and Kevin Lee. Forensic officers were able to determine that his attack probably started in the bathroom of the property. A significant number of blood spots were found in the living room, suggesting the assault had been long and sustained. And this was reinforced by the injuries found on Lucas's body after it was retrieved from the ditch in Thorney Dyke.
The depth of the wounds were much more than superficial, and the extent to which the knife went into Lucas's heart showed a high degree of violence.
Police were now aware that Joanne Dennehy had killed 3 people in Peterborough and savagely attacked 2 more before leaving them for dead on the streets of Hereford. And as their inquiries continued, they would gain further insight into the mind of a killer who appeared to show no remorse for her actions.
A really disturbing element of this investigation was Joanne made no secret of the fact that she'd killed Lucas. She told a number of people. And on one occasion, before her arrest, she took a young girl to a wheelie bin in the proximity of Rolleston Garth, where she had placed Lucas's body, and he'd been there for a number of days. And she showed a then 14-year-old girl the body of Lucas.
The evidence against Joanne Dennehy was compelling. And on the 18th of November 2013, she attended a pre-trial hearing at the Old Bailey in London, where she stood accused of murdering Lucas Labazewski, John Chapman and Kevin Lee. She was also charged with 2 counts of attempted murder.
We anticipated a long drawn-out trial, and a lot of work had been put in to prepare for just that. But it was a shock to everybody in that packed courtroom after 10 minutes. She stood up in response to being read the indictments, and she pleaded guilty. Nobody expected that to happen.
When I heard Joanne had pleaded guilty, I was very surprised because I thought that she'd wanted notoriety. She wanted to be in the limelight. She wanted to be recognised as doing something. But I was very surprised.
I think that she may even have made that decision at the moment that she stood up. I think it might have been as late in the day as that, because she could see a packed courtroom, the most famous court in the country. All eyes were on her, and this was her last opportunity to control the situation in a way that she wanted to.
On February the 28th, 2014, 3 months after her guilty plea, Joanne Dennehy returned to the Old Bailey, where she was sentenced to a whole life tariff.
The fact that she'll never see daylight again in the outside world is of huge comfort for the family. And whilst I don't measure success of any investigation on prison time, in this case, for Joanne Dennehy, it's absolutely the right thing that she won't come out of prison.
On sentencing, the judge told Dennehy she was a cruel, calculating, selfish and manipulative serial killer. She simply laughed when she was told she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. These are the walls that now protect the public from a cold-hearted, calculated female serial killer. And few would argue that the whole life tariff she was handed is anything but appropriate.
In my opinion, Joanne Dennehy is the most dangerous individual in the criminal justice system today. She has no emotion, she will not consider the consequences of her actions, and behaves in a way that is not erratic, it's calculated.
If I'm brutally honest, I don't ever want her to come out. I think because she would do it again. Because she has no remorse. So she deserved what she got. The world's safer without Joanna in it.
This case was the most demanding investigation emotionally on my team, on me, and the families involved, and principally those loved ones left behind. I've never experienced the catastrophe in the numbers that the events were unfolding in any other investigation, and I suspect it will remain that way for the rest of my career.
For his involvement in Dennehy's 14-day reign of terror, Gary Stretch was charged with 3 counts of preventing the lawful burying of a body and 2 further counts of the attempted murder of Robin Beretta and John Rogers. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, of which he must serve a minimum of 19 years.
The reason that Gary Stretch is serving a life sentence is because he enabled Joanne Dennehy to attack John Rogers after he had seen the terrible events of Robin Beretta unfold in front of him.
2 other men, Leslie Layton and Robert Moore, were also charged with assisting Dennehy in moving the bodies of her victims in Peterborough and for perverting the course of justice. They received sentences of 14 and 3 years, respectively. Ex-con Mark Lloyd, who was in the car on the day of the Hereford attacks, was found to have no case to answer. But meeting with Joanne Dennehy has changed his life forever.
She's destroyed my life, seriously. I was on the verge of getting a normal life. I was on the verge of getting a job. I'd left the bail hostel. I was no longer on probation. I had no outstanding warrants. I was clean for the first time since 1979. She's destroyed my life. That's the price I have to pay. That's the price I have to pay. I could be dead.
Dennehy's cold-blooded crimes have shattered the lives of her own family too.
We have not talked to her, spoke to her. I don't think she wanted to speak to us anyway, and I wouldn't like to see her.
To me, she doesn't exist anymore because she's destroyed people. So I would never want anything to do with her. Because she's not my Jo. The girl that killed those people is not my daughter. My daughter's that nice 14-year-old that never came home.
Joanne Dennehy will continue to be a threat while she's in jail. She is the personality that will continue to manipulate. She will manipulate whatever environment she's in, and she will continue to be a threat to staff and other prisoners in jail for as long as she's alive.
But the biggest loss of all will be suffered by the families of those that Joanne Dennehy callously killed during her 14-day reign of terror in the spring of 2013.
I just wish she'd never walked in, and I just wish that Kevin had never given her the chance that he'd given everyone else, because there's always one bad apple. Unfortunately, Kevin made one mistake and it cost him his life.